Welcome more to what seems to be Rivendell in the background. As we're talking about the 20th anniversary of Return of the King, we know that it came out on the 17th, but here in Australia, it came out on Boxing Day 20 years ago when I was, how old was I? I was something like 18. Now I'm 38, and it's been a long time. And it's been, it's the Lord of the Rings trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies of all time, and I wanted to, share some thoughts about the movie and the trilogy as a whole, just for a few moments, and really just to get people's comments about what your thoughts were on Return of the King and just going to the movies, I guess. Before the MCU, we had the Lord of the Rings in terms of big movie moments. That was sort of my generation, I guess, as a teenager, young adult. And just going to the movies each year and watching how it progressed and unfolded was a lot of fun. There was it sort of felt like you were watching history sort of unfold, like a moment in cinema history, if that makes sense. The brilliant acting of all the cast and crew and the work of Peter Jackson and Howard Shaw, with that music that you still listen to and still memorized or mesmerized, as they say, over the trilogy. And for me, I've always been like a fantasy sort of fan, into fantasy movies, and that this sort of opened my eyes in terms of what could be done on film and stuff like that. As you know, it took a lot of work to transfer books to film, as you know, and it can't be a 100% copy. Even if I decided to make a film based on my stories, I know that things would have to be changed, as some of the Tolkien purists would argue about certain changes that were made for the movies and films. But for me, going to the Return of the King felt like, I think for this generation, going to see Avengers Endgame, like that you were going to see something really special in movie history. You knew that this was going to be at the end. And while the MCU rolls on and hasn't done so well, you knew that with Return of the King, this was sort of the ending of this particular trilogy. And yes, they did do the Hobbit trilogy, so I guess in some ways it's technically the end of six movies, if you can say. Now we can say that after 20 years. And for me, just going in there and seeing the moments and scenes, the journey up to Mount Doom, and great scenes such as the battles were amazing. It still feels very realistic nowadays, and I think it was back in the day where they just didn't use CGI willy nilly, like all the time now. So it still feels like an actual battle happened out in New Zealand somewhere back 20 years ago, when they were filming it. And, seeing how the stories of friendship and mateship and how that all sort of came together. Because really, everyone was affected by this particular movie. The Fellowship, how it broke down after the Fellowship of the Ring, and the Two Towers meeting Golem was really the beginning of that sort of CGI sort of characters, where it's still the most one of the most realistic looks that I've ever seen myself. It still holds up after 20 years. Amazing acting by Andy. Amazing actor himself, as you've seen in the MCU and other movies too. But just looking back and thinking about how well the trilogy was put together, it could have been a disaster. But Peter Jackson and the crew and the cast and the writers and the script writers, and they did an amazing job. And it's something that I still watch from time to time, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I will probably watch some of it tonight, and will probably tomorrow. Um, Return of the King and all that, but still, it's still an amazing achievement. What the Lord of the Rings trilogy did, if you think about it. I don't think it can be repeated, especially in today's world where movies are basically sequels, too much special effects. The story writing is not too particularly good. So it's, yeah, I think you're just not going to see something like this ever again, unless someone's got the boldness and the vision to do something like that again. And there has been other stuff such as the Rings of Power and stuff like that, but it doesn't quite it will never really get close to what the Lord of the Rings trilogy is. So I thought I would share some little thoughts about it and what it was like just going to the cinemas and seeing it out on the big screen. And yeah, it's sort of one of those moments that you don't forget from a creative person's point of view. And I wish that it was back in the cinemas, but no one in Australia could see it was back in the cinemas, which was a shame. But I will be watching the extended edition, which is the only versions you should be watching. And yeah, so let us know in the comments what do you think about Return of the King and the Lord of the Rings trilogy as it is, and we'll see you next time on Chris Tice's Creating. We'll see you next time.